Welcome to the Minimalist Educator Podcast, a podcast about paring down to refocus on the purpose and priorities in our roles, with co-hosts and co-authors of the Minimalist Teacher Book, Tammy Borneman and Christine Arnold.
In this week's episode, we are in part 2 of a 3-part band all around instructional strategies. In this episode, we're diving into the double whammy, what it is, how it works, and why it might just be your secret weapon. Let's get into it, and we hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Minimalist Educator. Today, I am chatting it up with Christine. Hi, Christine.
Hi there. How are you today?
Oh, all right. I'm excited to talk about today's topic because it follows up last week's topic really well, and it's an interesting one, I think. How are you?
I think so too. Yeah, no, I'm good. Happy to be here and have a chat about today's topic as well.
So we're going to dig in a little bit to what's called a double whammy. And so this is something we mention in our book as an effective instructional strategy. And it follows our episode on one teaching point. So already we're talking like one teaching point, and then we're talking double whammy. So can you give us a little bit of info on what a double whammy is?
Absolutely. So the double whammy, as it is known as, was coined by Guy Claxton. And he was talking about how important it is for us to frame our learning, our teaching and learning, the content of a lesson alongside of the learning skill or the learning behavior. So while we know the content is so important for us to teach, we also need to consider the learning behaviors that we want our students to be picking up alongside that at the same time. So that's what Guy Claxton is referring to when he says double whammy.
Okay. So we're not talking about like two pieces of content or two doubling up like that. It's two different things, but working together simultaneously.
Absolutely, that's right. And a big part of what he's talking about is that whether you plan for the learning skills, the learning behaviors to be picked up, or you don't plan for that, the kids are going to learn something anyway. So even if you ignore all that we know about, 21st century learning skills or attributes of good learners, if you ignore all of that and just say, I've got my content I need to cover, the kids are going to be learning what is valued, what is important for them to be doing. How can they be successful in the classroom? And so his argument is that we should do this really intentionally so that the kids are picking up positive learning behaviors, and that we are having a clear direction with that rather than it happening incidentally.
Yeah, Guy Claxton is a cognitive scientist and education researcher. So I'm pretty sure he knows what he's talking about when he says that the intentionality is super important. Because I remember, again, teaching full time, and I'm like, okay, this is the stuff we're covering, and then didn't really pay attention too much to those behaviors, even though there was expectations and, I would mention things, or my co-teacher would be like, remember, we're teaching this strategy, but a good reader does this. And so we were doing that to an extent, but we weren't super intentional about it. I think it was just kind of a natural part of how we would teach. But the intentionality is really important when we want to see specific behaviors, especially, these behaviors are ones that we want to see when kids are being taught when they're little, all the way through school. And we can forget that as students get older, we think they just know the behaviors. And so we still have to, at those older ages, be intentional about what's the skill or behavior that's going to be taught alongside this content. True.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's making me think about that intentional, not intentional thing. It's making me think back to when I was a very young new teacher in early childhood. Now, I don't know where I picked this up from. I probably heard someone or saw someone doing it. I don't know. I can't remember now. But I used to, in the classroom, I used to have activities that were negotiable and non-negotiable. So there was some choice in the classroom, but there were some things that were non-negotiable. You have to do this in the course of your day. And this is how I sort of ran the centers or the different activities in the room. And then I started hearing my kids back in the role play corner talking to each other about this is non-negotiable. I had this real moment of like, oh my goodness, what have I been instilling in these kids? And they're now transferring it into their play and their social situations. So whether you are intending it or not, they are picking up cues from you, which they will then use in the rest of their life. So, and I think that can happen in many different ways. If we're focusing all the time feedback that's based on scoring, where we are putting across the message that scores are important, the number, the quantifiable part of your learning is the important part. And so that's what you do to achieve. That's what you do to be a successful student in this environment, is to get scores and high scores and so on and so forth. So I think no matter what we're doing, what our teaching approach is, we are instilling these things into our students. So it is really important to be thoughtful with it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. You never know what students are going to repeat from you, right? Especially if it is some of those repeated phrases. I was thinking about too, not just teaching what the behavior is, but why we're doing it. And again, I think that's one of the things that gets dropped off. And kids ask why, why are we doing this, right? And we can be put off by the asking why, but we should really just encourage that more, because when they understand the behaviors when we're doing this kind of thing in math or science or whatever, and we use these skills, this is why.
Yeah.
Because, this is what a scientist does, and a scientist has to la la la. And so giving that kind of almost like a greater context, I guess, and just understanding the purpose behind something. Because even if your student is 5, answer the why. It's not, they're not asking you to be annoying, which is what feels that way sometimes, especially when we get lots of whys. But that should be an indicator for us that, maybe I'm not giving them enough context behind what they're doing and why they should be doing it. And so the double whammy, I'm kind of just thinking like a little extension on it, where, we're going to learn this content, and this is a skill that you learn alongside it. And this is why we do that, just for clarity and transparency and being explicit with our language. Because again, we want students to, we're the model. We want them to come away with the skills that we need them to transfer through every grade, doesn't matter. And we have to do it repeatedly. So, Anything else you want to add on that?
Yeah, it's making me think about how it depends so much on the content that you're doing in your lesson. Can you do content? You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes.
But, there are lessons that you're doing or objectives that you're working on that will lend itself more freely to one sort of learning behavior or skill that you want to see in your students more than others. So I think that will lead you in the way that you do it. But for example, if the students were putting together a presentation and they had a certain amount of time that they needed to complete the presentation in. If you are simultaneously talking about those self-management skills and time management skills of how can you use the time that you have available, what if you get to the day before and it's not done, what are some backup solutions? So in that environment, you might not necessarily be talking about the skill of caring or kindness or something like that. That might not be as relevant, but you can really use the content and where it leads you to think about what are some of those learning behaviors or student attributes that you want those kids to have and come away with.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that, or not even things, experiences, I guess, that I have used at the school when I worked at the school in Kona, but learned from our friend Nicole when teaching in Singapore, is how to use this during discovery times. So kind of open-ended times where students are practicing skills, but they're also reviewing content that they've learned throughout a unit. Okay. So up on the board, before students were set off to do what they were going to do, it's like, okay, here's the centers basically, or the spots where you can visit. These are the content areas. So, fractions or whatever it is for your unit, different types of activities for that. And then as you're going through these stations, these are the skills that you're thinking about. And so students have the autonomy to choose any of the stations. They can stay at one the whole time. They can, flitter about, but they do have to really think about, it's a lot of the social skills, honestly. And so there's not just one skill focus because it's stuff they've been working on through the unit, but it's, if I come up to a new station, is there enough material if I join? If not, what should I do? So there's that kind of like self-reflection. If there's, when I'm in a station, what skills am I working on? And usually there is some place for them to refer back to because it is a lot of stuff going on. So then there's the skill related piece to that, whatever the stations are too. So it sounds like a lot's going on, and it kind of is, but it's also review.
Okay.
So it's not teaching like a new skill and new content. It's used for review so that they can practice all of those skills.
Right. I've just noticed a little pattern as we've been talking here with these examples of that we've been saying it as like content first and then the skill or behavior second. But I want to point out that it doesn't have to be that way. We can center those skills and behaviors first with the content coming second as well. I think that's important to mention.
That's a great point. And I was just in a classroom, it was a 5th grade math, and the teacher prefaced the class with like, here's our goal today. We're having math conversations. That's our teaching point. And so this class, like such great conversationalists, but when you go around and listen to them talk about math, it's amazing. And so he gave them these kind of little problem cards to discuss with they were either in pairs or groups of 3. And they had to look at what the image was. So you know how important visuals are in math. So they had a visual to look at, and then they had to discuss what that represented in terms of a decimal. And so they had a sheet to like match it to. But the important point was the skill they were working on was discussion. It didn't really matter if they got the answers correct. I mean, they checked them at the end.
Right.
But the point was, at the end of the lesson, the teacher came back and asked the kids, what was our goal today? And they said it was to have good math conversations about whatever. And he's like, a quick check-in, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, how you felt you did with that. And he's like, and honestly, like, I know we're practicing that math content, but I really wanted to come around and listen to you talk to each other about it. And so I'm like, that was just really powerful, because I think that we can also get caught in well, what's the thing they're going to produce today? Like, where's the worksheet or where's the paper that has the thing? And it's not always going to be like that. Sometimes it's your anecdotal notes from things that you've heard kids say that you just have to jot down, and that's fine, right? But the key there was that it definitely was the skill before the content. And I mean, he could have used any content, right? He was listening for how the kids were talking to each other about that content. So I thought that was really powerful.
Yeah, that's very cool. I like that. So, Tammy, aside from just being intentional, planning it out, whether it's in your planning documentation or just in the front of mind as you go into your lessons, are there any other ways that you feel like we could purposefully, powerfully bring in this double whammy approach?
I think so. We could, again, I hate to put, I'm not necessarily putting content first, but that's what teachers know they're going to be teaching. So I'm going to say teachers can come with the content and share with their student, we're going to be learning about this for the next 3 weeks or whatever. What are some skills you think we need to work on while we learn this content? So that co-creation of in the planning process where, okay, students are identifying, these are the things that we're going to have to do when we're doing research or when we're doing our small group work or when we are working on our final project. And so you don't always have to be the one that tells them the skills that they're working on because they'll probably know, which is great. But just telling the kids, right, you can co-create that list and post it up. And then again, that's one of those reminders for students while we're learning this content. These are the skills that I'm going to focus on. And during each lesson, then you can choose, okay, today, this is what our content areas, this is how we're going to learn it. What skills are we going to be looking at? And then each day, maybe you put a sticker, whatever, something beside it so that the focus is there for students as well. So anytime we can co-create something with our students, we know that they're going to be more invested because we're not just telling them.
For sure. And that would be so cool to do if you're at one of these schools that has, values or a student profile list, things like that. So you're actually getting the kids to refer back to those important things that your school has articulated that you want the students to be. So that'd be a really exciting thing to do, to co-create with the kids together. I love that idea.
Yeah.
Do we have a pair down pointer today, Tammy?
Maybe as a starting point would be to evaluate if and when you're doing double whammies. Okay. So I know we didn't really talk about that, but we kind of did with being intentional about planning. But do a check-in and see when, are you just strictly focusing on this is the content and I'm never talking about the skills explicitly, because we do have to do that. And just kind of see where the gaps are and maybe where you can fill in some specific skill pairing with the content.
For sure. And I think I would build on that and say, if you could institute some sort of tracking system for what it is that you have. If your school has that list already ready to go, or if you just pull out those, 21st century learning skills or whatever it is that you know of, that you're familiar with, and try and track it somehow so that you are getting that breadth of that as well as the breadth in content as well.
Yeah, I like that. Any kind of system like that is going to help with your data collection, which helps you communicate with parents. So
for sure. And if you get to bring in a spreadsheet in your day, of course you're going to do. Is that just me?
Oh no, I've got a few spreadsheets myself. So
okay. Bring it in with your double whammy as well. I like it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, for sure. I think, I think those are some good couple of pair down pointers, honestly. It feels doable.
I think so.
And thanks for this conversation. It's always a pleasure chatting.
Absolutely.
We'll see y'all next time.
Today's episode was brought to you by Plan Z Professional Learning Services, forward-thinking educator support. Find out more at planzplservices.com.
Be sure to join Tammy and Christine and guests for more episodes of the Minimalist Educator Podcast. They would love to hear about your journey with minimalism. Connect with them at PlanZPLS on Twitter or Instagram. The music for the podcast has been written and performed by Gaia Moretti.